Okay, here we go. I don't know where this jumbo thing came from, but a little easier to stretch out. Wow, almost cracked the dais there. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the October 14, 2021 of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And before we start the meeting, there's a few things that we need to cover because we're doing meetings in a hybrid sort of fashion. You might be watching on cable TV or at edinamn.gov/live meetings or facebook.com edina/edinamn. There's only one time you can participate in the meeting today. There's no public hearing matter. That's with community comment. That'll come early in the agenda. And people can call in and talk to the HRA about matters that are not on the agenda today or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing. If you want to do that, call 800-374-0221, 800-374-0221. And the conference ID is 3217088, 3217088. Give the operator your name and street address and your telephone number. Press *1 on your telephone keypad when you would like to get in a queue to speak. And a city staff member, Jennifer Benarad, our communications director, will bring you into the HRA meeting. And you'll have 3 minutes. So whether you're here with us live this morning or tuning in remote, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. And I think Liz Olson will give you a heads up when you've reached the 3-minute mark or close so you can wrap up your comments. So that is it, I think, is all of the information we want to share in anticipation of the meeting. We're also going to have a closed session portion of the meeting today. It's on the agenda, and we'll deal with that when the time comes. So let's call the meeting to order, and Liz Olson, our Administrative Support Specialist, will do the roll call. Ms. Olson?
Commissioner Jackson. Here. Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next matter is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise with me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, folks. We've got a form of meeting agenda that's been published in accordance with our rules. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda in any form or fashion? Is there a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as published?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Got a motion and second to adopt the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting agenda say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then next we are on to community comment. As I said, that comes early in the meetings, whether it's the HRA or the City Council. And again, if you would like to speak about something that's not on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing before the HRA, you're welcome to come in and comment to the HRA. Again, that conference, the telephone number is 800-374-0221. It's on the screen. And then there's your conference ID, 3217088. Give that to the operator. Give them your name and address and your phone number, and then we'll get you in to speak to the HRA. Director Benarad, do we have anybody in the queue waiting to speak to us?
We do not.
All right, is there anybody in the audience that wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them that's not on the agenda today or scheduled for a future public hearing? All right, seeing no one coming forward, we'll move on from that portion of the agenda to the consent agenda. And we've got several items on the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the HRA, any commissioner that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda items as shown?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Anderson to adopt the consent agenda and the single items in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of so doing say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then we're on to reports and recommendations, which is the heart of the meeting today. And this will involve some really interesting topics. And the first one is the Eden Wilson Redevelopment Tax Increment Financing District and our Economic Development Manager, Bill Neuendorf, has this presentation for us this morning. And then we've got Nick Anhut from Ellers, who is available for questions as well.
Morning, and thank you. We'll jump right into the first item this morning. We have a full agenda, so I'm going to jump right into it. In the packet is a presentation, as well as a staff report and a thick document that says TIF plan. So our purpose this morning is to consider the establishment of a new tax increment financing district in the area right near City Hall. It includes the site that's currently occupied by Perkins, 2 other older historic buildings across the street, and a lot of the right-of-ways, the roadways in the immediate area. So the area shown in this map, there's a historic photo from the 1950s that shows what it looked like before the highway came through and when it was a series of local roads. That area changed dramatically in the 1970s when the highway came through with the combination of bridges, on-ramps, off-ramps, and some changes to the local streets. I mentioned today the site is currently the Perkins Restaurant, and across the street are 2 of the city's historic buildings, the Grange Hall and the Cahill School. The Perkins was originally built in the early 1970s. It's an older building. It's notable that the land is valued higher than the building value. The 2 historic buildings were originally built in the 1800s and relocated to this site in the 1930s and then moved around a little bit in the 1970s. We've had an independent consultant from Stantec evaluate each of those buildings, and they did deem them, or they found them to be considered substandard per the TIF statute, which allows us to reconsider a redevelopment TIF district. The roadway network has been studied extensively over the years. On 50th Street in particular, there's high traffic volume during those peak rush hours. The area is notable by a lack of sidewalks and bike routes that are very limited. In many of the city's planning documents, we are seeking redevelopment that transforms the community in a little bit different way to create more vibrant neighborhood nodes, safety for multiple modes of transportation, whether you're driving, walking, or bicycling. The Planning Commission met yesterday or last evening and did confirm that the plan with these new proposed buildings and new roadway improvements is consistent with our planning documents, our comprehensive plan. So I think we're all familiar with the primary project here. Reuter Walton has been working on this for several months now and is winding the way through the process. The project was supported by the Planning Commission back in April, secured preliminary zoning approval in June, and it is currently on a path to secure their final zoning approvals in November. Early in the process, staff did meet with the developer. We reviewed their financial performas, and we did confirm that there is a financial gap. Based on our opinions and the input from Ellers Associates, the city's financial advisor, we are recommending that tax increment financing be considered for this project. The actual contract with the developer will happen in the next step. What we want to do today is talk about creating the TIF District, which is the first step in the multi-step process. On the screen is a concept layout for roadway improvements to the area. This is still an early sketch. It has to go through final engineering and a series of input adjustments. But what we hope to do is really transform the area and make it more attractive, more welcoming, and safer and convenient for bicyclists, pedestrians, and drivers, both in the immediate area as well as the neighborhoods that surround these areas. So real quickly, what is TIF? This is the same presentation we've had before, so I won't get into it in too much detail. But the short story is that with this new project, the amount of tax base that's on this site will increase by about a factor of 11. So it's not doubling the tax base, it's not tripling the tax base, it's not quadrupling the tax base, it's increasing it by a factor of 11. And it's those incremental property taxes that would be used as a pledge to the developer to make his budget whole, as well as to be used by the city to pay for these public improvements. For this project, we're anticipating a pay-go note would be pledged to the developer, which means that we would actually make payments once they successfully finish the project. That ensures that there's no risk to the city, but it's an incentive to the developer to get the project finished. And for the roadway improvements, we would expect revenue bonds, TIF bonds, to be used. Once we see that the project is actually far along in the process and is going to be finished, that's when we would actually consider financing those roadway improvements. So there's probably about a year or two delay in the road improvements after the Perkins project would get started. The process that we're using today is the same as we do for any TIF district. We're at step number 1, we're just creating the district. There's a series of prescriptive requirements in state law that guide the process creating the district. Along the way, we make stops at the Planning Commission here with the HRA. We'll have a public hearing that's scheduled next week, and then finally a stop at the City Council. So this is the second stop in the process. After we create the TIF district, that's when we'll consider the contract with the developer. And that, again, will go to this board. We're expecting late October, and then it'll roll over to the City Council in early November. So November 3rd is a big date for this whole project. That's the date that we are anticipating that the developers' final plans would be up for consideration, as well as a TIF district, as well as a TIF contract. The district itself is shown here in blue. We also put a comparison to see how much TIF we're using in Edina and how frequently we use it. So we updated that chart. Again, we find that the city of Edina uses TIF on a pretty limited basis, and certainly to a much lesser extent than most of our neighbors. In 2022, when this TIF district would actually be on the book, about 1% of the city's tax base would be included in a TIF district. That's a notable decline because the Southdale district will terminate at the end of this year, bringing all that tax base back into the regular taxing mix. So this map shows the boundary of the district. It includes Perkins. It includes all the roadways to get up to 50th to make some improvements to that intersection and the sidewalks and roadway routes there. It also includes Tupa Park, a part of the City Hall property. You'll note that City Hall is excluded. We don't think that's going to be impacted by the TIF district. But all the roadways, the driveways, the curb cuts, whether they serve neighborhoods or streets or properties like the City Hall, all of those curb cuts would be impacted by these roadway improvements. One of the key elements of the TIF plan is the budget. Ellers Associates has determined that about $22.7 million will be generated and collected in this TIF district over the next 25 years. And the TIF plan identifies a projected way that those dollars would be invested. These are rough estimates, so they're not firm numbers. The only firm number on this morning is that $22.7 million. That's being established as the maximum budget for this district. And as we actually get final costs in for engineering work, roadway work, et cetera, we would fill in this budget. So some of the individual line items like land acquisition or site improvements or utilities, those numbers might change over the years, but the 22.7 is the key figure to consider here. So in summary, we found via the Stantec report that the site does qualify as a redevelopment TIF district. Our Planning Commission has confirmed that these plans do comply with the city's general plans for redevelopment, notably our comprehensive plan. After meeting with the developer, we've confirmed that high development costs as well as restricted rental income, because they are going to do 10% affordable housing here. That does create a financial gap. And unless we bridge that gap, the project will not move forward. So it's our opinion that it cannot be reasonably expected that this project, the Perkins project, and the road improvements would happen unless we use tax increment. And that's our recommendation here this morning, is to create this district and continue in our conversations with the developer. With that, I'll stand for any questions. As was mentioned, Nick Anhut from Ellers is here with us this morning. Chad Milner, our city engineer that's been working on the transportation plan, is also here, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you, Manager Neuendorf. Questions for Manager Neuendorf? Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first question is actually for Mr. Anhut, and that's on slide 17. We're looking at interest. And I wonder what our anticipation is. Are interest rates rising, and do we have any way of, can you explain to me how we are adjusting for that, or accounting for that?
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Nick Anhut with Ellers and Associates. The budget that is put before you assumes a 4% interest rate on the cash flow, which is accumulating over a 26-year period. So we've been very conservative in estimating that amount. I will add that we are merely establishing a budget for the life of this TIF district, and so if rates come in lower than that amount, you'd be able to utilize that for other line items within that budget. So those are interchangeable. This doesn't lock you in to that amount, but we have been conservative and assumed what we've seen as kind of a private market rate for development.
So you're assuming a 4% interest. The actual interest rates today are very, very low, aren't they? Much lower than that.
This budget will be accommodating to, I believe, any type of borrowing that the city wants to entertain for the public costs that Mr. Neuendorf mentioned.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And then I have a question for Mr. Neuendorf, and that is, walk us through the land acquisition. I know that was an important part of the design of this project. It was a parcel, or part of the parcel along 100, but for the public, can you remind us why that land acquisition is in the TIF district?
Sure. The Perkins site was designed in a way where about roughly 10,000 square feet of the property will be granted to the city, initially with an easement, and then eventually with an ownership stake. And that was left out of the developer's footprint and his project to accommodate a future roadway improvement. We're expecting at some point in the future, we would reroute that off-ramp from the highway, and the developer is agreeable to basically dedicating the land to us, to the city, for that type of purpose. And so that's the acquisition line item.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, actually. On slide 16, Manager Neuendorf, the parameters of the TIF district, and you've explained them, and I understand somewhat why. I do note that as we include the areas immediately north of the Perkins site, is there, for instance, the Cahill School is there. Is there any anticipation or plan for that parcel or the one just north of that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the parcel where the two historic buildings are is included for a couple reasons. Firstly, to make sure that we can get the path for the roadway improvements and the sidewalk improvements to the north. But also for many, many years, the city there's been various conversations in the city about whether or not those two historic buildings are in the best place. They were initially moved there. The Grange Hall was moved there in 1935 when it was a large wooded area on a quiet local street. That context changed radically when there was a 4-lane or 6-lane highway built right next to it, and they had to move it and then surrounded it with an off-ramp. So we've met with the Historical Society, with our Heritage Preservation Commission and our Park and Rec Commission. They have not made any final decisions, but they're all open to having a further conversation about whether or not there's a better place for those buildings that allows them to be used in a context that is safer to access and more neighborly. The buildings are used on a regular and routine basis for for school groups, as well as there are some meetings that are held there. So each of the 4 studies that we've heard about usually ends with a conclusion saying, it's a good idea to move them, there's lots of different options, but we don't have money, so let's not even worry about where we put them. With this TIF plan, we potentially could have funds to relocate them. And looking at all these conversations that have happened since the 1980s, that's usually the weakest link. There's no money to move them. So if we can use, if TIF is available for relocation, we want to put that in as an option to consider. It is not a mandate. In all the language that I've been using, I've been strongly stressing the word if it's desired to move them. So it's an option that we'd like to establish.
Okay, and so what I'm getting from that is that that you would anticipate, I don't see it noted in the budget, but does that fall under other improvements at $5.5 million?
That's correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it's anticipated in this budget?
Correct.
I see, okay, good, thank you. Okay, and so the parameters, I just lost my load here, excuse me. The parameters of the TIF district are basically to include all of the anticipated roadway improvements.
That's correct.
And those are comprised essentially of, we're trying to create sidewalks in here, some bike paths, and improve the pedestrian and cycling experience in here.
That's correct. To make it easier to access the site, whether you're coming from the south, coming from the north, or the east or west.
Okay, great. Okay, the concern that I have about the TIF district in general, although I should ask Mr. Anhut a question as well. The kind of, we're including both the development, the support for the development, as well as the roadway improvements in one district. But there must be a mechanism within that kind of detaches the developers' payments. At some point, those end, and we're anticipating, I heard 1 or 2 years there. And that couldn't be the timeline for those increments to accrue to reimburse the developer. Am I asking that clearly? I may not be.
I believe so. So the action before the HRA is really creating the tool to be able to facilitate both the redevelopment for the private expense of the developer, as well as the public infrastructure and investment necessary to bring this all forward. It would be subject to a future HRA action to actually agree to providing the increment to the developer and the terms upon which they would receive that increment to finance their project, as well as approving each one of these public infrastructure improvements and how you would finance that. We've created a budget that we believe can accommodate both of those things, but the devil will be in the details as we move forward and as you consider the individual aspects of this overall redevelopment project.
Okay. Let me just ask a question or two about the budget itself. If I can get to it. Thank you. I got it here. So we've got an acquisition of $3 million, acquisition support at $3 million bucks, and the interest expense, as Commissioner Jackson mentioned, at 22.7, could even be on, well, possibly on the high side, although over a 26-year district, interest rates could change in there, but we're looking for an average. If for any reason any of these line items came out or were reduced, that obviously would reduce the interest expense as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
It may very well be that you do not spend all of this potential increment, and that would certainly be something that the HRA could consider as it moves forward. If you're able to do this in a much more efficient way, all to the better, you would have additional capacity to think about other ways to redevelop this area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I want to get to the root of my concerns here, and it's been discussed before. But on August 31st, we chatted about the acquisition price here. And I just want to mention that the original purchase price in November of 2007 from county records is 4.2. It's on our books and has been, I believe, for some time at a valuation, estimated market valuation of just under 3.1. We have, I'm assuming that the $12 million acquisition site is still in play?
To our knowledge, yes.
Okay. So in that same meeting, the city assessor could not find a comp in Edina that supported that purchase price. And I'm wondering, based on even the acquisition price over on 70th and France at the US Bank site, which I believe is 10 million, I'm informed, there just is a lot of support to the fact that this purchase price is very, very high. And we have a $3 million support price in here for acquisition. And I'm not convinced that that's an approach that is appropriate here and should be included in this TIF district. We need these roadway improvements. They've been long overdue. And if this is the mechanism that we use to go forward, and to the extent that there's public realm benefit that the developer is providing and is being reimbursed for, that's understandable, of course. I'm struggling with this $12 million sales price and our support of it. I just think it's off the charts, to be honest. In fact, those were the very words of the assessor. So I'm wondering if you have any comment about that.
The land price is on the higher end of the range. I'd agree that at this point, there's no immediate comp in Edina in this immediate area. We did find other comparable projects in other neighborhoods in Southwest Minneapolis, places in those types of areas where the price is in line with some of those properties. But it's a high dollar amount. I can't disagree with that, but it's the price of the project. The location, what do they say about real estate? Location. This site hasn't been touched in so long. Since 2007 was the last sale. It has not been built upon since 1973. But it is a high land price. But we have discussed that with the owner or with the developer. He's gone back to the owner in order to make the project happen. That is the cost.
That's Eden Ventures LLC. The recorded owner is actually a local businessman.
Correct.
Okay. A question possibly for Mr. Anhut along the same line. If for any reason the acquisition price was lowered or removed that is being supported here, that would definitely affect the interest payment?
To the extent that you don't
If it comes
finance
out,
that
yeah.
amount, correct.
Okay, which could lower the overall budget for the TIF district, potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Again, you'd have to strike that deal in order to make that project feasible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Staunton, questions? No. What we're talking about today is the merits of establishing a redevelopment tax increment financing district. The terms of that with the potential developer would be something we deal with over the next few months, as I understand it.
That's correct.
And so I think up here on the dais, whether it's our group acting as the HRA or the council, we always want that public purpose issue adequately addressed. And what is it that caused the two of you to conclude that you would make this recommendation to establish this district?
I think the biggest rationale for it is twofold. To see an outdated property that has been, the business model at Perkins has had its ups and downs for the last several years, bankruptcy, new owners on a couple occasions. So to see that property be redeveloped in a fashion that's really forward-looking is certainly something that's exciting for the community. But also having a funding source for these public improvements. We heard from many neighbors in the immediate area and surrounding of the challenges that they face on a daily basis, whether it's the parents, the kids, or the grandparents going through the area. So to identify a funding source that can make a lot of those improvements happen promptly, that to me is the public benefit.
Thank you. And Mr. Anhut, what would your response be?
If I may
As you went
add-
through your professional analysis and recommendation.
Certainly. As we reviewed the proposal to redevelop the Perkins site in particular, it was very clear that the site and the intention behind what the developer's trying to do qualify under the statutory framework for a redevelopment TIF district. But my recommendation would hinge very similar to what Mr. Neuendorf mentioned, is that I saw that there was a potential here to alleviate or overcome some public barriers that might be in place to redeveloping this area, where we do have kind of a sort of landlocked situation with a lot of infrastructure needs servicing not just this project, but the larger Grandview and City Hall area. So we saw this as an opportunity to maybe provide a funding mechanism to do that and facilitate future redevelopment throughout the city.
When you looked at the general funding gap, I think I recall that it was in the $5.1 million range, that funding gap. And so that gap represents about 6% of the total project value. Was that percentage influential at all with either of you?
Oh, it certainly is. Yeah, I mean, this is a very expensive project to build. If you look at the architecture, they're not sparing, I mean, they're making a big investment in the quality of design, the scale of design, the public realm improvements in the immediate area. It's a very expensive project to build. And especially coupled with the fact that they are doing the affordable housing on site, that directly hinders their revenue generating abilities for the next 20-some years. So we tend to look at 10% as a cap for TIF contribution. Most developers try to get 9.9 or 11%. So as we scrutinize this project and their financials with Nick's diligence, to have the gap only be about a 6%, considering the expense here, considering the donation of land to the community, that makes me feel very comfortable.
All right. Just a couple of things to affirm here as I took some notes. I think you said that if this TIF district were approved and we struck a deal with the developer, that beginning in 2022, even with this project included, only about 1% of the city would be in a TIF district capacity. Was that an accurate note I took?
Yep, that's correct. Yes, right now the largest TIF district in Edina is the Southdale. And that was an 8-year economic district that comes off, or that expires at the end of this year. So starting in 2022, even with this year, we've had at least one new TIF district for affordable housing. This Eden Wilson is potentially going to be added. Even when you add these new smaller districts, we're only at about 1% of our overall tax base, which is on the extreme low end.
Okay. And then early in your presentation, I think you maybe talked to Director Teague and indicated that this is consistent also with the comprehensive plan for that particular neighborhood. Is that correct?
Yes, we did review that and submitted a staff report to the Planning Commission. We reviewed 4 different plans, actually. The recent comprehensive plan, the 2012 Grandview plan, the 2016 Grandview Transportation Plan, and then the 2012 Southeast Edina Redevelopment Plan. And this project is consistent with goals of each of those documents.
Okay. And then I think it was in your report that the tax capacity of this site from the present to the future, if all of our ducks get in a row and we get this thing put together, this project put together, the tax capacity would be an 11-fold increase, as I understand it.
That's correct. Right now, the tax capacity of the property is about 60,000, and upon completion, it'll be right around 691,000. So that's, and we ask others to estimate a little bit on the conservative side in that regard. So we feel comfortable in that number.
Okay. Those are all the questions I had. That prompt any other questions from any other commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, thank you. Just one other small item. I think three of us had an opportunity to go through the Bower last week. It's a nice building. And their average there is $367 a foot. Their asking price is $367 a foot. And do you have any insight as to what the, you've probably analyzed this, the average there or their rental structure? I am assuming that this is a 4 to 5 star building.
This will certainly be a very, very nice building. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but we have reviewed the numbers. I don't know if we looked at the price per square foot, unless Nick can work some magic.
I will find it before we leave the dais.
Yeah.
I wouldn't speculate. I'm just saying that we're beginning to see a market that, at the Bower, anyway, 1,000 feet, it'd be $36.70 a month.
I would expect it to be in the high 2s or the low 3s.
Are you satisfied that the increments will be there all the way through, and that there's no question about that, and that the business model, the business plan is correct, and that we have no risk of default in that building based on rents that may or may not be attainable? Is that a possibility?
I think once the developer secures the debt and equity investments and they're locked in, which should be happening in the next few months, I'm confident the project will do everything that we've anticipated, and possibly even more so.
Okay.
I don't have any doubt.
Okay, that's reassuring. Last thing here is, at the current EMV, we locked that in for 26 years, do we not? At just under 3.1? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson's questions prompted me to recall, this is based on something Commissioner Jackson asked, but she asked about the estimated interest rate. You took a conservative sort of approach at 4%, but what have we typically been borrowing at for projects of this nature when we need to do so?
If I may, Mr. Chair, just for reference point, the city issued bonds this year for improvements supporting the Grandview Redevelopment TIF District. Those bonds are repaid over a 22-year term and at 1.8%.
1.8%.
Correct.
Yeah, I was
That's a
recalling
tax
that we were
exempt rate.
under 2%. So
Today.
yeah, I'm pleased you took this conservative sort of approach so that we could make sure that things worked, and I think that was important to Commissioner Anderson too. All right, and in terms of shifting of risk, this is a segue to Commissioner Anderson's question. You don't see any shifting of risk back to the city in any way, any form or fashion? If this was if the district were established and then we subsequently cut a deal on a development agreement?
No, I think the only, another way to stagger the road construction would be to bond for those in advance of the project. That shifts the risks to the city, and we're not recommending that. We're recommending we stick with the pattern we've used for many projects. Let the private investment happen. Once we see that it's happening and we're assured that there's a revenue stream coming in, then bond for the roadway improvements, and that way the risk is virtually eliminated.
All right, good. There was good dialogue this morning.
I think we have one other detail that Nick can add.
If I may address the previous question on the rents, 286.
286.
Correct.
Good.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, gentlemen. Any other questions from commissioners? So what, yes, Commissioner Staunton.
Just picking up on this risk issue, when you come back to us, with the next stage of the process where there's a development agreement and a basically the deal with the developer and the amount of money we're going to be able to use on the road improvements. That will detail for us the kind of the order in which the TIF accumulates and gets distributed, right?
It will, yes.
All right, thank you.
Good. Any other, did that prompt any other inquiries that commissioners want to make? All right. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. We're preparing to vote here now?
Well, I'm going to ask if somebody wants to move the matter.
Okay, thank you. I want to mention prior to that request,
Sure.
Mr. Chair, that I'm in support of a TIF district here because these roadway improvements are very, very important. This budget is a deep concern for me. And I just want to mention that going in so that you understand my position completely. Thank you.
I think we've got some time to work on those concerns, so thank you for that comment. All right, we've got a request from our Economic Development Manager and our Public Finance organization, Ellers, that's recommending the passage of Resolution 2021-12, which would establish what we're calling the Eden-Wilson Redevelopment Tax Increment Financing District and approve a tax increment financing plan therefore. As I said, that's all embodied in Resolution 2021-12. It's an HRA resolution. Is there someone who would care to make that motion, Commissioner?
So moved.
Second.
Sorry, we got a motion from Commissioner Staunton, second from Commissioner Jackson. Further discussion? All those in favor of adopting Resolution 2021-12 for the purposes stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. And we'll move on to the next phase of dealing with this prospective development. Thank you. All right, the next matter we have is something it seems like the whole Twin Cities is concerned about. Not just Edina, where it's been an iconic sort of landmark for us for decades, but the emails we've had, I think all of us from neighboring communities and even further afield wanted to see us figure out some way to keep the Edina Theater going. And Manager Neuendorf, you plus the owner, plus one of our, I'd say in the Twin Cities, one of our historic family theater operators have come up with some ideas on how to keep the Edina Theater operating and refurbishing it in the process. So look forward to your presentation here. And I know we've got Susie Hoagland, the owner of the property, and Steve Mann and Michelle Mann from the Mann Theater operation with us today. Thanks for being here this morning. And so we look forward to the presentation. Go ahead.
Great, yes, thank you. Good morning. So the presentation is in your packet. We've discussed this, we've discussed the theater with this group on a couple of different occasions. First alerting that there was a problem, and then alerting that we might have a solution or at least a direction. We're here this morning with the terms that we think can be put together to reoccupy that movie theater. It's been a tough year for theaters and cinemas of all type with the pandemic. Even before that, changing habits, Netflix, streaming, et cetera. So it's a different industry. Susie Hoagland and her family have owned the property for many years. They had a long-term tenant that dissolved during the pandemic. They walked from the property. And we were able to have some conversations with the Mann family, who are locally based. They're based in Bloomington. They have several different cinemas across the state, truly experts at what they do. This, I believe, is their third generation of the family that have been in the industry, and they continue to have success today, but also foresight into the future. And you'd alluded to the fact that we've been getting calls, so newspaper articles, phone calls, emails, letters, et cetera, about what can the city do to help get that theater reoccupied. The cost to reoccupy it is high. It's an older theater. It was built, the front historic part was built in the 20s. The actual auditoriums were built in the 80s. They need more than a facelift. They do need a fair amount of repair. So at this point, the owner and the prospective tenants have reached tentative terms for a lease that I think everyone is comfortable moving forward with. But it requires a massive capital investment. And the parties are willing if the city can help out with some of those capital costs. So earlier this fall, using some of our federal monies, we had earmarked up to $200,000 to help support the theater. That has been certainly appreciated and goes a long way. But as the tenant has dug in a little bit deeper to understand what needs to happen to that facility, not just to reopen it, but to make sure that it's an exciting destination for the community as well as the region. It needs more than just a couple $100,000 of improvement. We're looking at about $1.5 million investment into the property just to get it back up to the state where it's operational and a great destination that people will support. So the degree of work includes updating and redoing virtually all of the common areas, the entrance, the lobby, there's a concession stand on the first floor. There's a mezzanine level here where the toilet rooms are that has not been touched for quite some time. And then the upper level where there's a second cafe concession area, which hasn't been used in years, if not decades. So there'd be massive improvements to all of those common areas, plus improvements to each of the 4 auditoriums. So new equipment, new seating, new speakers, new projectors, et cetera. There's a substantial capital investment. Also, the historic sign and marquee that's on the front of the building is frequently in disrepair with burnt-out light bulbs that can never be replaced. We hope to repair that sign and get it in better operating condition so that it truly is, the landmark for Edina. So the staff's recommendation is to provide additional funds that allow the landlord and tenant to enter into a long-term lease. With the amount of work that's happening, they'd be looking to start as soon as they can and then reopen in the spring of 2022. Mann Theaters is very willing to help provide additional community benefit, not just to reopen the theater and make it look nice, but to make the theater available to local community groups for their type of programming. In the years past, there used to be an Edina Film Festival that eventually struggled and stopped happening because they couldn't afford the rent at the movie theater. So the Mann Groups has expressed that they would be very willing to help make the rent doable for a small independent film festival or for neighbors or community groups, whether it's staff meetings of the school board or community meetings for a nonprofit group during, not during peak times of movie showing, but at other times of the day or the week to make the facility available for those types of community activities. So the recommended assistance is a total of $500,000 from the city. That would include $200,000 from those federal funds, the ARPA monies, and that would be a grant. That would be structured as a grant to the landlord. That was discussed by the city council in early September. And then in addition to that, we're recommending an additional $300,000 that would be structured as a forgivable loan to the tenant. The loan would be completely forgiven when they occupy the building for the 6th year. So right now they've got a 5-year lease with a few 5-year options. We at least want to get them into that first option. And if they can get that far, we'll certainly forgive the loan to them. The monies would need to be invested into brick and mortar improvement. So in the worst case, if the business would fail, we would still have an updated facility that could be reused and reoccupied by a different group. On top of those 2 fundings for the tenant and landlord, we're also recommending that we consider in the future, I don't have a dollar amount for this one, but some additional public improvements. 50th and France, a lot of the sidewalks are in disrepair, especially around the theater. The cost to replace those sidewalks escalates every year. And then the parking facility right behind the theater, which is where most of their patrons park, also needs some improvements and repairs. So the city's facilities department is actually working on a budget for that. And we'll come back to the group in the next few months with an actual budget and proposal. But we recommend that we use some additional TIF monies, most likely, to fund those improvements. The reason we're making that recommendation this morning is once we reoccupy the theater and provide some support to make sure they can reopen, we don't want to throw a special assessment at them in their first month and blow their budget. So this is one of those cases where by having the HRA pay for some of those improvements, we avoided extra burden to the theater as well as extra burden to the other shop owners in that area. This recommendation is at this point a pledge. The owner and landlord, our owner and tenant are working on a lease agreement, and they'd like to write in that they have the pledge of the city and the HRA for these monies. So certainly these funds will not be granted or provided until we have firm legal contracts in place. We expect that to happen in the next few months. But what we're looking for this morning is your pledge and sign of support that these terms are generally agreeable, and we look for your direction as staff to work with our city attorney and actually prepare full documents, which we would bring back to you at a later date. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Yeah, good,
The
thank
Mann
you,
family and
Manager
Susie's as
Newendorf. That
well.
was a thorough presentation, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm pleased we have the owner and the prospective tenant here with us this morning. Do any of the commissioners have questions for Manager Newendorf, or would you like to make inquiry of Mr. Mann or Ms. Mann or Susie Hoagland? Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to all the parties involved, I'm really excited this is happening. This is so wonderful. So thank you for continuing to work on this and keeping the Edina Theater alive in our city. I know it's iconic, and I'm just so pleased that this is, and we've got a local operator. That just makes it even better. So thank you all. My question is actually for Mr. Kendall. And this is part of my learning process, but could you please walk through where the city's authority is to give money to something like this? I would love to see it happen, but I'd also like to understand where that authority comes from.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. The authority is twofold, as Mr. Newendorf mentioned. So the first authority would be under the American Rescue Plan Act. The city can give grants under that act, as long as the funding is related to COVID mitigation, and that could be various physical improvements to the building related to ventilation, HVAC, physical distancing renovations, anything tied to COVID mitigation appropriately under the statute can be the subject of an ARPA grant. And then with respect to the second funding source, that could take the form of a business subsidy under Minnesota Statute 116J. That can fund physical improvements to the building. We would have to negotiate a business subsidy agreement governing that. But those would be the two sources of potential authority.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, thank you. I think it's important for our residents, too, to understand the legal basis for what we might potentially do here today. Commissioner Anderson, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. I know that there's been other interest, significant other interest, actually. And I'm wondering, with the evaluation process, we're only seeing this one. How many people have been interested, and how did we arrive at this proposal as the one that we're absolutely taking action on?
Yeah. Good question. So the landlord has certainly pursued a lot of different avenues, several different operators, local and national, for-profit and not-for-profit type of organizations have been pursued. Not only is Mann anticipated to be the best proposal, they're one of the few that are willing to put this level of money into the property at this time. So some of the other nationals and larger companies, which are solid groups, they're not ready. They're still stressed from the pandemic. They're still operating at half capacity and no staff and whatnot. They're not in a position to make an investment. a few, at least one other national, once their business limitations were looked at, they found that there was a non-compete clause for certain markets, and they were prohibited from actually opening. Although they had solid interest, they would have to buy out that non-compete with other facilities, and that just raised the price with zero benefit. So that one didn't look strong. And then there are also a few other nonprofits that were a lot of passion, a lot of interest. They'd be started. One of the concerns with one of the nonprofits is they're starting from scratch, and they've got some great ideas. But at this point, the theater's been dark for going on 2 years. To start from scratch, it could be another 2 years before the plan comes together. The owner is not willing to wait that much longer in hopes of something. The Mann Group is available. They're interested. They've got funding. They've got the passion. They've got the experience. That's why this team has been brought together. But ultimately, it's the landlord's decision. The city does not own this property. We're just hoping to fill a gap to make it happen.
Okay, just to follow up on that thought, I know I heard in your presentation that it'll be available for nonprofits in the area, but the business itself is not being, the tenancy that's created is not on a nonprofit basis. It's
Correct.
a for-profit operation.
Correct. This is a for-profit operation.
Okay.
Correct.
And so the nature of the forgivable loan to the tenant is, I just wonder how that's applicable. I mean, if it's a business loan, and I feel like we should be in the position as a city to support this theater especially. It does open a little bit of a question about whether the businesses could feel that they qualify on some level for that type of funding. And I would be hard pressed to grant every even reasonable request. So the nature of the forgivable loan is at least a question for me. I wonder if you could comment on that.
The idea of the forgivable loan was to make sure that the work gets done, as opposed to providing a grant up front. Make sure the work gets completed, and make sure that the community's goals of having an operational theater are addressed. It's still an uncertain time. There's not a lot of product out there. It's not being released at the same rate that it was a couple years ago. So by structuring this incentive as a forgivable loan, we reward the developer or the operator for doing what they say they're going to do. They fully expect it to do and follow through. I mean, they've got a massive investment into this property, so they expect to make it operational. But structuring this as a forgivable loan provides a little bit more certainty to the community that in case something goes wrong, that we'll at least get most, if not all, of the money back.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sutton?
So my questions are for the Manns. You know, we're being asked to make about a $500,000 investment in this project, and I don't have any sense of what kind of investment the Manns are making. I'm not asking you to disclose that, but I am asking for you to tell us why you think this is an investment that will not be a waste of money.
Well, thank you for the time and consideration today.
Could you identify yourself too, please? for the
Steve
record?
Mann, and this is my partner, Michelle, and I have another partner, Michael, who's on Zoom. He's in New York today.
And your business address too, Mr. Mann?
900 East 80th Street in Bloomington.
Thank you.
First, let me say, you know, the demise of the theater currently was two factors. One, it was neglect for many years, and second, COVID. The theater industry, as I'm sure you've all seen in the news, was probably one of the hardest hit businesses out there. But what this theater needs, in our opinion, is a complete makeover. You know, our vision, our plan is when we're done with this theater, it'll be as fine of a theater as any theater in the Twin City area. You know, we plan on installing luxury recliners, which would take our seating capacity. It's currently 1,300 seats. It would take it down to about 550. Those seats are spread out 7 feet apart, but it needs to happen. You know, if we're going to move forward with this project, we can't do just bits and pieces. It has to be a complete makeover. The concession needs to be redone. The bar, our plan is to put in a bar upstairs, second floor, which is really, from our standpoint, we have bars in other facilities. We really don't put them in for the concept of profitability. We put them in as an amenity to the customer, just to offer another amenity. Our plan is to, you know, put in all new screens, all new projectors, all new sound equipment, which some of those things wouldn't have to be done. I mean, the screens are there, the speakers are there, but, you know, we need to make the upgrades to make it a destination for the city of Edina. And you spoke earlier about investment from the city. This isn't the first time we've entered into an agreement with the city. We've done it with our theaters in St. Paul. We did it in Hibbing, Minnesota. We did it in Champlin. Every city wants a theater, and they hate to lose a theater. And I think, you know, as Bill pointed out, the number of emails and calls that you've had, what's happening with the theater. We feel that we can bring this theater back to the heyday, or we wouldn't be willing to make the investment that we're planning on making. As far as an exact number, it's going to be an investment of a minimum of $1.5 million, and we really won't know until we get into it. We made some calls yesterday. The shortage of trying to get equipment right now is just crazy, and the cost as well. But, you know, whatever it takes, we're prepared to do. So if it exceeds that number, so be it. So hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Other questions for the Manns? Yes, Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, I forgot to mention earlier, thank you for the community group opportunity to do it at cost. Our former colleague, Mike Fisher, his son, did a film as a high school student, and it was shown at the Edina Theater, and it was a really moving opportunity. And so I'm so pleased that our young filmmakers in town here will have a facility to work with, and I think that's a really important part of the community. One question is just to follow up on your comments about other cities. Can you sort of tell us the track record of success in doing these? It's wonderful to hear you've done this before.
Well, you know, in some of them, like Champlin, for example, the problem with Champlin is we were competing with Maple Grove. You know, theaters have a tendency, when we build a theater, restaurants come. That didn't happen in Champlin. And the reason it didn't is every restaurant under the sun is located in Maple Grove. So we got to a crossroads where we decided, well, do we sell the property? We had a church that was interested in buying the facility, or do we go in and make a massive renovation? We chose to go that route. We made an investment of about $5 million in that facility, and it's doing quite well now. The ones in St. Paul, you know, that one, the mayor got involved because he didn't want to lose the only 2 remaining theaters in the city of St. Paul. And those theaters are kind of similar to the Edina from the standpoint they were built in the 1935 about, yeah. But, you know, our business is still recovering. It's been a real struggle. You know, we were mandated closed by the governor for 6 months. There's been a shortage of film. We're against streaming. But things, you know, we've been doing a lot of negotiating with distributors to get windows so that, you know, films that open in theaters, No Time to Die opened last weekend, the new Bond. You won't be able to stream that for 45 days. Those are the fights that we're fighting, and we have a national organization that represents us. That's what we need. It's been proven if a film is exclusive to theaters for a period of time, it responds, as opposed to you sitting in your home, whether it's, you know, on an HBO Max where it's free, other than the service, or you pay a pay-per-view of $30 to see a film. It's going towards, you know, distributors are learning that our model works. It's been around for decades, and we're confident that, you know, that's going to help make our business much more profitable and back to what it was, for example, in 2019.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm pleased that Commissioner Staunton asked you the question that he asked, because I knew that from you calling me one day, and we've had a couple conversations over the past year and a half, but I could detect a family enthusiasm about this opportunity, and so I'm really pleased that it can work out. And I think having you describe to the HRA and our community what you intend to do in terms of totally refurbishing the theater. And then we're going to get that sign done too. I think we've even put in a grant request with the state to get that sign rehabbed. It's going to be a wonderful asset again for our community. And so Susie Hauglund too is sitting back there, the owner. Thank you for working diligently on this. I know that you, of course, worried as a landlord and a property owner that taxes go on and other things continue on in terms of obligations, but I'm pleased that you were able to come to an agreement here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anecdotally, I had a dinner the other night. There was a guy from Minneapolis, and I told him what was potentially going to happen here, and he asked the question, well, what's the status on the Edina Theater? And he said, it's one of the places my wife and I love to come and have dinner and go to a movie. It's one of our favorite things to do, is to drive all the way from downtown Minneapolis, where they live in a condo, to Edina to enjoy a night of watching a film and having a meal. And I think that you're giving us that opportunity again. So any other questions for Manager Neuendorf? The motion that staff is requesting is that we approve the term sheet, which I thought was well done, and authorize staff to prepare contractual agreements to provide financial support to the landlord and the tenant with respect to the Edina Theater. Is there a motion to that effect?
Yeah, I'm assuming that the contract comes back to us at the time.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make that motion.
All right.
Second?
Seconded by Commissioner Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thanks for being with us this morning. And our resident who is interested in other activities, thanks for being here as well. There she goes.
Left.
All right. Under state law, Minnesota statutes 13D.05 subdivision 3, we're allowed to close sessions of either the council or the HRA for certain purposes. And one of the purposes is to discuss potential sale of real property. In this particular circumstance, it happens to be a potential sale of real property at 5146 Eden Avenue, which most people know as the old public works site. And so I'm going to entertain a motion now to close the session of the Edina HRA as permitted by Minnesota statutes 13D.05 subdivision 3 to discuss the potential sale of real property located at 5146 Eden Avenue. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Staunton, second by Commissioner Jackson. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just want to, for the public who are watching, we're not going to come back on TV after this is done. Is that correct? We are? Oh, okay. I just wanted to clarify.
All right. Thanks for that
good. Thank you.
clarification. All right, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, we have now moved into closed session to discuss with,
You'll need to give us a few minutes
Yeah,
to close everything out, and then we'll give you the signal.
where's our meeting, Scott? I can't remember. Right over here. There.
There we go.
All right, we are back in open session after having a closed session as permitted under Minnesota law to discuss the potential sale of real property located at 5146 Eden Avenue. We're going to move on now on the agenda to HRA Commissioners' comments. Anybody have any comments they wish to share with their colleagues? All right, and the Executive Director, any comments?
Just one comment, Your Honor. That is that also on the 1028 HRA meeting agenda, we'd like to have the brief discussion that we've talked to you about before about meeting dates and times for 2022. We don't have to necessarily resolve that question that day, but in terms of giving you a little time to think about what your preferences might be, what your availability might be for the upcoming year, Would be good to have get some sense of that from you at that meeting, because we are moving forward with getting our master meeting schedule tuned up for the next year.
All right, thank you. That cause anyone on the HRA to have a question or further comment? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn by Commissioner Staunton, second by Commissioner Jackson. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried? Stand adjourned.